first part of the anime begins by showing the atmosphere in a city in the Leones kingdom ravaged by war. A young man wearing a suit of armor seemed to be looking around as if he was looking for something. He saw an old man wearing the same armor as him and rushed over to him. The two of them then walked through the city streets and were surprised to see the Holy Knights, the royal guard troops, die in a very sad state. The knights were apparently slaughtered by a group of people who called themselves the Seven Deadly Sins. A long time ago, the Seven Deadly Sins were an independent order of knights that served the kingdom of Leones. However, they were declared traitors and villains for some unknown reasons. The Seven Deadly Sins were widely known as the strongest knights of Leones and were greatly admired by several holy knights and apprentices. But after being branded as traitors and criminals, they were forced to flee and become criminals from the kingdom. 10 years have passed, but the kingdom has not managed to catch a single member of the Seven Deadly Sins who is still in search, even though they have spread portraits of the members all over the country. Meanwhile, at a bar called the Boar Hat, people were talking about the figure of a knight who had recently been seen on a hill not far from there. The knight put on a worn helmet and armor and walked hastily towards a place. The residents thought that the knight was one of the members of the Seven Deadly Sins who was about to head to his hiding place. A young blonde man named Meliodas seems to be listening to the story attentively while serving the customers who keep coming. Despite having the appearance of a child, Meliodas is much older. He is the owner of the Boar Hat and the only person working at the bar. Because of that, sometimes he is overwhelmed with handling the customers. The Boar Hat is famous for having a delicious and varied beer menu. However, the food is bad, as Meliodas is a terrible cook. Often, customers throw up their food, and if that happens, then Meliodas will call Hawk, his talking pet pig, which helps clean up the disgusting food scraps left by customers. Not long after, a man entered the bar in a hurry and said he saw the figure of the knight on the hill that the residents had been talking about. They were even more convinced that the knight was a member of the Seven Deadly Sins and went back to discussing the massacre of the Holy Knights, which was said to have been carried out by them. After that, the knight in worn-out armor that was being talked about suddenly entered the bar, surprising the customers with his rather large and sinister figure, making all the customers run away from the place. However, the knight seemed to be very exhausted because he collapsed right in front of Meliodas, who looked surprised. After all, the figure of the knight talked about all this time turned out to be a young woman wearing worn armor. Because the woman had fainted, Meliodas took her into the room and laid her on the bed. He studied her intently and wondered why the beautiful and slender young woman would bother wearing the heavy and worn-out knight armor. Soon afterward, the young woman finally woke up and asked where she was. Knowing that she might be exhausted from the long journey, Meliodas asked her to rest in the Boar Hat and gave her some food. Unexpectedly, she appreciated the food he made and immediately finished it because she was hungry. She then introduced herself as Elizabeth and told him she was looking for members of the Seven Deadly Sins. Before Elizabeth had time to tell Meliodas why she was looking for them, the holy knights guarding the area were suddenly at the Boar Hat's door after receiving reports of a knight in worn-out armor from fleeing customers. Meliodas then meets the holy knights and tries to distract them, while Elizabeth tries to sneak away. However, the holy knights immediately noticed her actions and chased her into the forest. Seeing this, Meliodas rushed to save Elizabeth and took her to a safe place. When they had managed to escape the pursuit of the holy knights, she revealed that the reason for looking for the members of the Seven Deadly Sins was to ask for their help in dealing with the holy knights, who were increasingly acting arbitrarily. In fact, the holy knights did not hesitate to arrest members of the royal family whom they considered traitors. During their conversation, one of the holy knights named Twigo appeared, slashing his sword towards the hill they were on, causing part of the hill to split and fall down. It didn't stop there. He then showed the ability of his sword to cut down all the trees nearby when Elizabeth tried to escape. The scene then switches to the past, where at that time, Elizabeth was still in the palace with her father, who was the king of Leones. Because the holy knights had launched a coup against the kingdom, the king asked Elizabeth to escape from the palace through a secret passage and began her search until she finally arrived at the Boar Hat bar. Back to the present, Meliodas does not just stay silent and reveals his true identity as the captain of the Seven Deadly Sins, which is why he can easily defeat Twigo with just one slash of his broken sword. Knowing that the holy knights might be coming to capture them, he takes Elizabeth with him, removes the Boar Hat with the help of Hawk's mother, the extremely large green pig living underground, and transports the Boar Hat with her head. Later, Elizabeth was hired as a waitress in Boar Hat and decided to join Meliodas in finding the other members of the Seven Deadly Sins. Not long after, Meliodas and his companions finally arrived at a village called Britannia, which is famous for having a plantation producing delicious red wine. However, he was surprised when he learned of the condition of the village, which had been hit by a drought and was threatened with starvation. Meliodas and Elizabeth then headed to the village square, where many people were crowding and working together to pull out the sword belonging to one of the holy knights that had caused a drought in the village, causing the villagers to experience a prolonged crop failure. The knight of the Holy Knights who stuck his sword in the village was named Gilthunder, annoyed that the red wine the villagers served him was not good. As a result of this action, the village of Britannia was hit by a drought, and Gilthunder didn't care about the villagers' fate. In fact, he sent 2 of his men to raise the taxes the villagers had to pay to the Holy Knights if neither of them could pull out the sword. Upon hearing that, Meliodas stepped forward and could easily pull out Gilthunder's sword and throw it at his men. The villagers cheered happily because they were finally free from the drought, while 2 of Gilthunder's men immediately left the village, intending to report the incident to their master. In the evening, the villagers come to the Boar Hat and party there as an expression of gratitude to Meliodas for helping them. At the same time, Gilthunder, who was enjoying his dinner alone, was surprised by the arrival of 2 men who reported that his sword had been pulled out. When he learned that a child pulled out his sword, he threw a spear at the town just to check whether it or not it was an accident, even though the town could have been destroyed. Elsewhere, Meliodas, noticing an attack coming their way, rushed out of the Boar Hat and saw a spear of magic power rushing towards him at high speed. He tried to hold back the spear that was now aiming at the village of Britannia, which with Gilthunder's magic power, was able to destroy the village. Although the captain of the 7 deadly sins, Meliodas, seemed to have difficulty stopping the spear's advance, he was forced to use his magic power and finally managed to stop it. After that, he threw the spear back at where Gilthunder was at Fort Salgales, which stuck right near Gilthunder's face. With Meliodas' magical power that can't be underestimated, the spear also managed to destroy Gilthunder's residence to smithereens. Seeing this, Gilthunder smiled happily because he finally found out that Meliodas was still alive after 10 years of missing without a word, and looked forward to their next meeting because he had a desire to kill Meliodas and the 7 deadly sins for supposedly killing his father, Zarathustra, 10 years ago. The next day, Meliodas and his companions decided to leave the village of Britannia and rushed to the Forest of White Dreams, assuming one of his comrades was hiding there. After traveling quite far, they finally arrived at the Forest of White Dreams, shrouded in thick fog. Shortly afterward, they encounter prankster imps that attempt to confuse travelers by creating copies of their companions. However, Meliodas manages to force the imps to flee towards a sleeping giantess. They wake up. Unexpectedly, the giantess is none other than Dione, a member of the 7 deadly sins. She is delighted to meet him after a long time, but is jealous upon seeing Elizabeth. Meliodas then asked Dione to help him find the rest of the 7 deadly sins, and she agreed. After that, the sky above them suddenly turned dark, and a vortex of black clouds appeared accompanied by lightning that struck right at them, causing their bodies to be trapped by the electricity from the lightning. Not long after, Gilthunder finally appeared in front of them, where Meliodas immediately recognized Gilthunder as one of his grown protégés. In the old days, Gilthunder was friends with Elizabeth, who used to play together. At some point, Meliodas taught him the fundamentals of swordsmanship in the way of the knight. Gilthunder used to look up to the 7 deadly sins and wanted to be just like them. However, everything changed when his father was killed. Unfortunately, the 7 deadly sins were accused of being the mastermind behind the murder and planning to stage a coup against the Holy Knights and the Kingdom of Leonis. Hearing that, Elizabeth defended the 7 deadly sins by saying they had no intention of carrying out a coup d'etat. Gilthunder seemed to ignore her words and urged Meliodas to tell him what had really happened 10 years ago. Meliodas reveals that 10 years ago, he and the 7 deadly sins members were asked to meet Zarathustra in an old castle. However, when they arrived at the castle, they were shocked when they saw Zarathustra had died in a pathetic condition. Shortly after, the Holy Knights came from all over, surrounding them in the castle. Meliodas asked the members of the 7 deadly sins to hurry to save themselves, and after that, Meliodas suddenly fainted. When he woke up, he was already in another place. Gilthunder didn't believe his words and instead challenged him to a fight. He accepts the challenge and asks Dione to take Elizabeth and hawk away from there. During their fight, he praised Gilthunder, whose power had grown more and more rapidly. He even received a fatal hit from Gilthunder, which caused him to fall to the ground. When Meliodas was already in a state of helplessness, Gilthunder even accidentally revealed the location of the other members of the 7 deadly sins to him. It turned out it had been planned by Meliodas, who then rose after receiving a fatal attack from Gilthunder. However, he did not intend to fight back against Gilthunder. After learning of the existence of the Deadly Sins members who were locked up in the Baste dungeon, Dione caught Gilthunder and threw him flying far away somewhere. After that, Meliodas and his companions rushed to the Baste dungeon to save their comrade, Bon. However, Meliodas suddenly collapses from his injury, so Elizabeth and Dione decide to go to a nearby town to treat him. Meanwhile, in a town not far from the Forest of White Dreams, several people were seen praying in a church, asking God to bring down punishment for the Holy Knights because they had acted arbitrarily to the residents, increasingly suffering day by day. Suddenly, a lightning bolt struck the building, and Gilthunder entered the place in a rage. At the Baste dungeon, Bon looks messy with long hair and a beard almost covering his entire face. After successfully freeing himself from his bonds, Bon broke through the prison cell door and fought with several guards, which he deliberately did to shave his hair and beard. Arriving at Dalmary City, the closest town to the Baste dungeon, Diane immediately took Meliodas to the nearest clinic so that he could be treated. Knowing that his health condition makes it impossible for him to travel, she decides to go to Baste dungeon and save Bon alone. However, Diane and Elizabeth get into an argument because Elizabeth insists on helping her, while she wants Elizabeth to stay with Meliodas. During their debate, suddenly, the residents started running in panic after seeing the appearance of a black cloud coming from the Baste dungeon. The black clouds are a swarm of poisonous insects controlled by Frisia, a holy knight with the ability to manipulate insects. 5 years ago, Frisia and the 3 other members of the Weird Fangs confronted Bon from the 7 deadly sins. The battle ended up with him being captured and imprisoned in Baste dungeon, where Frisia remains one of the dungeon's 4 guardians. Turn to the present, Diane tries to protect the city by creating stone pillars that kill swarms of poisonous insects. An enraged Diane then rushes to the Baste dungeon to find the mastermind behind the attack. Meanwhile, Elizabeth realizes that Meliodas' condition has worsened after being poisoned by the doctor who treated him on orders from one of the holy knights, Golgius, who already knew about his arrival in the city. At the Baste dungeon, Bon reminisces about his past with Meliodas and the 7 deadly sins. At that time, he was curious because Meliodas never looked angry, so he tried to forcibly take Meliodas' sword, which he had never used during the fight, but it turned out he could keep the sword. At the same time, Golgius seems interested in Meliodas' sword and tries to steal it. But then, he suddenly woke up and glared at Golgius, saying he would never let anyone take the sword from him. Seeing something strange happens to him, Golgius rushed to escape from that place. However, Meliodas, who had recovered, managed to block him. All of that turned out to be Meliodas' plan to reveal Golgius' true power, which turned out not to be teleportation power, but a power that could make his body transparent. They fought there again until their fight was intervened by the doctor who asked Golgius to free his daughter because he had carried out Golgius' orders to poison Meliodas. Hearing that, Golgius stabbed the doctor instead and chose to run away from the fight because he was seriously injured. After that, Meliodas and his companions decided to save the doctor's daughter, Senate, who was held captive by the Holy Knights. Meliodas seemed very sure that Bon had been released and was only waiting for the time to meet him. At the Baste dungeon, Bon engages in a fight with one of the Holy Knights, Jericho, and manages to defeat the female knight. Bon then strips his armor, intending to put it on. However, it turned out that the armor was too small, so he gave up. On the way, Meliodas and his companions met Diane, who attacked them instead. She is under the hypnosis of a holy knight named Ruin, so Meliodas is forced to fight her. As Meliodas and Elizabeth try to dodge Diane's attack, they encounter a shepherd man with his son, and while wanting to save them, he instead falls into Ruin's trap. The battle became even more fierce because Ruin managed to hypnotize Meliodas, so now he and Diane are fighting because they think they are enemies. As they still fight each other under Ruin's control, Frisia attacks the shepherd boy, making Elizabeth risk her life to protect him. However, as Ruin reveals his true identity, he realizes that Elizabeth took his bell and broke his spell as he and Frisia are quickly defeated by Meliodas and Diane, with the other disguised shepherd revealing where Senate is being held. When Meliodas and his companions enter the Baste dungeon to save Senate, Golgius and Jericho set a trap so they can't get out of there. On the other hand, Bon meets a holy knight named Jude, who immediately stabs him in the chest. Surprisingly, Bon's wounds healed almost instantaneously, no matter how severe it is, because he had the power of immortality. He also did not age, did not need to eat or drink to survive, and even his body was immune to all kinds of poisons. He even could have easily escaped the Baste dungeon, but he purposely stayed there to wait for Meliodas to appear. After hearing the guards talk about Meliodas and Diane, Bon finally decided to end his vacation in Baste dungeon and rejoin the 7 deadly sins. At the same time, Meliodas managed to free Senate, who fell unconscious when she met the big Diane. Meliodas and Bon finally meet again after a long time. This is the end of the 7 Deadly Sins Season 1 Part 1.